All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Day in the Life of a Physician Scientist event put on by the American Physician Scientists Association. We're really excited to have you guys join us this evening. We have a really exciting schedule planned out here. My name is Danielle Amusin. I'm a fourth year MD PhD student at Northwestern University. And joining me behind the scenes is Monica Rasmussen, who will be kind of manning our chats as well as taking questions during the Q&A portions of the session. And we also have Kyle Enriquez, who's going to be doing some of the social media behind the scenes as well. In terms of our agenda for this evening, we're going to kick things off with a really short presentation on what is a physician scientist. And that'll kind of lay a framework for some of our conversations later with our students during the student panel. We have three trainees here who will get to share their stories, and you'll be able to ask them some questions about their experiences as well. Then we'll take a short break and come back with Dr. Jenny Baumgardner, who is a surgeon scientist at The Ohio State University and is also the director of their MD PhD program there. And so we'll have a fireside chat with her, as well as open it up to a question and answer where you can ask her some of your burning questions. And just as a housekeeping note, I know that it's a fairly long event and you may need to step out at some moment. The session is being recorded, so if at any time you need to step out, you will always have access to the recording later to take a look. So with that, we'll kick it off directly into our Physician Scientist 101. So what is a physician scientist? How can you become one? How do you know you want to become one? So, keeping it simple, a physician scientist is really just somebody who combines the roles of being a practicing doctor who takes care of patients and also a scientist who goes on to do research. And it's kind of a really open career pathway, as you'll see in a moment. And physician scientists are involved in just about anything related to the biomedical space, such as treating patients, leading a research lab, mentoring students, medical students, and graduate students in their labs, helping lead clinical trials or partnering with industry to bring medications, devices, etc., to patients. So, really a wide span. And physician scientists are really present in just about any medical specialty. Looking at this chart from a study that looked at what physician scientist trainees go on to pursue, you can see just about everything is represented here. Most commonly, we see students pursue internal medicine, pathology, and pediatrics. And these are specialties that have traditionally had more research track residencies that people tend to go into. And pathology is a space where it's very fertile for a kind of research to combine with their clinical practice. But if you're interested in anything else, can go on to do that as well. And physician scientists are present in a lot of different career pathways. You can see that many choose to stay in academia and be involved in leading research labs, but others go on to maybe just practice more medicine, such as working in private practice, or may not do medicine at all and go on to work more in industry with pharmaceuticals, devices, biotech. And yet others also go on to work for the federal government, and we see physician scientists in agencies such as the NIH or the CDC. And we mentioned that a big portion is research, and the research also spans just about any discipline as well. More traditionally, we see physician scientists in the basic sciences, things like oncology, neuroscience, etc. But there's kind of a rising contingent of students who go on to pursue social sciences like public health, anthropology, sociology. And others go on to work in more of the clinical sciences space, such as working on quality improvement projects in the hospital, implementing clinical trials, etc. So, just as there are many paths for physician scientists, there are just as many paths to becoming a physician scientist as well. More of the traditional routes start at a four-year institution, completing a bachelor's degree, and then going on to potentially take a couple gap years or not, and then go on into medical school. There are many options for medical school, including pursuing these combined MD, PhD, or DO, PhD programs that we'll talk a little bit about. But others begin their journeys in community college, earning an associate's degree, and then going on to then finish their bachelor's degree at a four-year institution, and then go on into medical school. And not all physician scientists actually do a PhD or a combined program. Some go on to just do a four-year medical degree and then pursue research training through alternative means, such as a research track residency. So there's really no one size fits all. And if you don't see your pathway represented on this slide, that doesn't mean it's just as great of a pathway to get there. So we mentioned these MD, PhD, or DO, PhD programs. So what's that? These are really combined medical and graduate school programs that have students both earn that clinical degree as well as take time to earn their PhD. Often these are longer programs, around 8 years of training, sometimes a little bit of wiggle room, 7 to 9. And these are commonly structured in what's called a 2-4-2 or 3-4-1 system, where the very first 2 to 3 years tend to be spent in medical school. And then students take a break to go back to graduate school and work on their research on their PhD thesis. And then they'll come back for 1 to 2 more years into medical school to complete their clinical rotations. Many of these programs are fully funded, which means that the tuition is fully covered by the program, and they often will also provide a stipend to you to help you cover all of your living expenses, such as rent, food, etc. Now, one note is that some of these programs call themselves MSTPs. This stands for Medical Scientist Training Program. And this just means that that program is funded by the NIH, and they are given that money from the government. But that doesn't mean that non-MSTP programs don't also give full funding. But those that are not MSTPs, you need to do a little bit of more research about the program to make sure that that's covered or not. So this is a really long time. You're probably thinking to yourself, like, why would anyone ever want to spend 8 years plus in school? And that's a valid question. One of the advantages to these programs is that they are very integrated. So if you're interested in clinical and research, during the clinical portions of medical school, there's often a curriculum around some of the research elements. And while students are pursuing their PhD, there's often dedicated time built in to help kind of refresh on some of the clinical medicine as well. And the goal is to try to kind of get this very cohesive pathway to students finishing 2 degrees. And this really allows a very unique perspective to connect clinical medicine with with implementing research. And there's really this translational medicine kind of paradigm called bench to bedside, where you have this ability to research something in the lab and be able to really connect it to clinical trials and try to get it out to patients. And the reverse applies just as well, where you might be out on rounds and seeing a really interesting patient, and that might spark a really cool question that you can then be really well equipped to take back to your research and kind of try to study it a little bit better. So that begs the question, there's these programs. How do I know that I want to become a physician scientist in the first place? And there's not one correct answer to that question. But what I would recommend is that you seek out experiences to really tell yourself that you want to do clinical medicine and you also want to become a researcher. Some examples of things that you can pursue clinically include shadowing physicians, trying to volunteer at a clinic or a hospital. You can find jobs working as like a patient care technician, become an EMT, etc. And on the other side, getting involved in a research lab. So you can find a lab either at your institution or another local institution and try to get involved in the research that they're working on. And there's also other opportunities. For example, during the summer, you may join a research internship. There's often programs at large research universities as well as at the NIH. And there are also other programs for people who have already completed their bachelor's degrees, such as the NIH IRTA program, as well as finding jobs as a research assistant. But this is by no means an exhaustive list, and there's many ways to get involved and gather these experiences. So, research is a really important part of this, and really understanding that you want to become a researcher, and also for later going on to apply into these programs, you'll need to talk a little bit about that. And so, what makes a good research experience? And the key really is trying to pursue quality over quantity. It's not as important how many different research projects you get involved in as your ability to kind of dive really deeply into one and clearly understand it. The goal for a good research experience is really to work towards independence and being able to clearly explain your work. And you want to really work towards being able to answer some of these questions on the slide. Like, why is what I'm doing important? Why am I even doing the technique that I'm using? Why am I not doing something else? Or you might encounter challenges while you're working on it. Can you kind of brainstorm how you would solve those problems and propose that to your mentor? And of course, when you complete something, what is the logical next step in the project for getting it to where you want it to go? And just as I mentioned, there are multiple different pathways to becoming a physician scientist. Some of those are these combined degrees that we mentioned, and others are the single clinical degrees and research time elsewhere. And there's no one right decision for which pathway you should pick, but there are pros and cons to either. So, for example, getting an MD or DO degree with alternative research experiences, pros include a shorter training time of 4 years of medical school. And you don't have that lapse in clinical training because you don't kind of exit the clinical route to do a PhD in the middle. But on the other hand, that means that that research time is not built in and you need to find it elsewhere. And the whatever time is built into the medical school is probably not as rigorous. And these programs are also not going to be fully funded unless you kind of earn a scholarship through other means. And that often means taking out loans and later paying back the debt on those. On the other hand, with these combined programs, school is often paid for, which is great, and you get those research training experiences. And that means that you are likely going to be a more competitive applicant for some of those research track residencies and positions. But on the other hand, that does mean that it nearly doubles the amount of time that you would be spending in medical school. And of course, you may go on to realize that actually you don't want to be using both of those degrees and you only end up using one. And you have to deal with that kind of coming back to medical school after getting your PhD, where you're going to have to do a little bit of catch up to remind yourself of how to take care of patients. So, in terms of these MD, PhD, and DO, PhD programs, what does actually getting into one look like? And the answer is that if you've learned a little bit about medical school admissions, the process is extremely similar. In fact, you fill out the same exact application form called AMCAS. However, there are a couple small additions. There are two additional essays that you have to talk about your research experience as well as why you want to do a combined degree. Coursework is going to be really similar to medical school with your basic sciences, and some schools have additional requirements such as English, stats, psychology, etc. So you would have to look on school websites for those. Additionally, you do have to take the MCAT, and on the applications, you'll also get a chance to highlight some of your other experiences, such as volunteering, shadowing, leadership, and of course, also talking about the things you're passionate about, like your hobbies and interests. And key as well, and lastly, is the letters of recommendation. It's really important to get good letters from your mentors, and for these combined degrees, especially getting letters from your research mentors is essential. So with that, that kind of wraps up a really short overview about kind of what is a physician scientist and what are the steps of pursuing these physician scientist training programs. We do have additional resources and information on the American Physician Scientists Association website. So if you want to take a look at this QR code or the link, that'll direct you into a our kind of undergraduate resources section of the website. So with that, I want to jump into our student panel. We have three trainees here on the call with us today, Danielle, Vijeeth, and Arthi, who are in various portions of their current MD, PhD training. And I'll bring them in now to introduce themselves and stop the slides. So for each of our trainees, I'm just going to ask you to briefly introduce who you are, where you're located, kind of what are you interested in, and just very briefly, kind of why you pursued the training you did and kind of how you got there. And I'll kick it to you, Danielle, to start things off.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. Hi everyone. I'm Danielle Sawyer. I am a seventh year MD PhD student at the University of Arizona, and I am currently in my fourth and final year of medical school. So I completed the MD PhD program or will complete it in 7 years. Um, so I'm located here in Tucson, Arizona. My interests as far as research and clinical are all in the field of oncology or cancer research, especially DNA damage repair. That's kind of my field of research and study so far. Why I decided to pursue an MD PhD, that's kind of a long story, but I will keep it brief and just say, I had a lot of great research experiences as I was getting ready to apply to medical school, and I found it really exciting that we can test hypotheses and figure out things that no one knows the answers to. And that was kind of the initial spark that pushed me, along with, family members becoming ill and wanting to be able to push the field of medicine forward as well. So, yeah.
I'll send it to Vijeeth next.
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Vijeeth. I'm a fifth year MD PhD student at Northwestern University in Chicago. So I've done 2 years of medical school and I'm in the third year of my PhD now. Let's see. So I went to Grinnell College for undergrad where I did biochemistry and computer science. And the reason that I ended up going towards the physician scientist pathway is because I've always been really interested in science. And especially as I started doing comp sci at Grinnell, I was like becoming really interested in computational research. And I had a really great research opportunity one summer where I was actually able to work with a physician scientist because I knew I wanted to be in a biomedical sort of research environment. And then seeing someone who was actually, he was an oncologist, so he had patients that he was working with, and we would work with those patient samples in the lab. And I just found that experience really cool. It wasn't something that I knew was actually possible before that summer, that you could do both of them. But seeing that inspired me to think about medical school more. I'd always like it was in the back of my mind, but I was more interested in science. And then after that experience, I kind of shadowed and did some more volunteering and realized I really liked both and wanted to do both. So that's how I ended up here.
And last but not least, Arthi.
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Arthi. I'm also at Northwestern with Vijeeth and Daniel, and in Daniel's cohort. So completed 2 years of medical school and now on the second year of my PhD. And my focus is on public health and injury prevention. Before coming here, I was at Duke University and studied global health and loved it so much. I did a master's in global health, so happy to talk about that as a gap year option. I came into college with an interest in medicine, similar to Danielle, had a family health experience that I navigated, and that's sort of what brought me to the physician path, but had an interest in public health and sort of wanted to figure out what that could look like and how I could integrate it. So, through some fieldwork opportunities I got to experience in India, through volunteering and research, I saw that more human level research through surveys and national data could be an option for a PhD. So, explored a master's to sort of figure out what methods I would want to use and what my specific niche would be, and then came to Northwestern to explore further research in public global health.
Thanks, everyone. For the students on the call, the purpose of this session, in addition to kind of talking about some of the questions that I have prepared for them, is also a chance for you to be able to ask questions as well. So now that you've gotten a very brief chance to meet our panelists, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to bring them up to the panel as we kind of go through things. And if we don't get a chance to answer them live, we may be able to also answer some of them in the chat as well. So thanks everyone for talking about your experiences. So on the presentation we had, we talked a little bit about how kind of these early research experiences during undergraduate were really essential to getting to understand that you want to go on to have this career as well as later applying. And so, starting with you, Vijeeth, you mentioned that you had this really great mentor at Grinnell. Can you talk a little bit more about how you found this mentor and how you kind of navigated that early experience?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, actually, so I went to Grinnell, like I said, which is a smaller liberal arts college, so we didn't have as many research opportunities on campus. So I actually did a lot of summer programs to explore different types of research that wasn't available at Grinnell. And I'd say two of the most impactful research experiences for me did actually come from those summer programs. I also did research at Grinnell, but in particular, there was one summer I spent at TGen in Arizona. I'm from Arizona at TGen in Arizona, where I was working, like I said, with a physician scientist. And I think that was my first time. I had done like some research before, but that was my first time in a very translational lab, meaning a lab that was like directly working with patient samples and trying to answer a very clinical facing question. And I think that experience showed me that I really like biomedical research, but it also taught me that I don't really like wet lab research, which is why the next summer I decided to do a different REU at Carnegie Mellon this time to explore computational research because at Grinnell I was becoming more interested in computer science and whatnot. And at Grinnell we actually didn't have that many computational research opportunities. So I saw a question in the chat about like what type of research experiences are valued more, like comparing REUs and things at your own institution. I think it matters more trying to find experiences that you're genuinely interested in exploring because those will be the ones that will inform where you end up in a more meaningful way and will be easier to talk about in general once you get to that stage. So I'm glad that I actually did have an option of like staying at Grinnell and doing a different type of research that summer or going to this RU at CMU. And I'm very glad that I decided to do that and got to explore some more computational work because now that is what I do. So
That sounds great. Um, and I also wanted to take this question to you, Danielle. I know that you started your journey at community college and then went on to later pursue this training pathway. So did you pursue those research experiences early on in community college, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I attended Santa Rosa Junior College for 5 years before I finished my degree at UC Davis. And I am a first generation to graduate college as well. And I think that it was really difficult to find research experiences because they're virtually non-existent at community colleges. They don't have lab spaces. They just don't have those kinds of opportunities. I was really lucky that the junior college that I went to actually partnered with a local private research institute. It was the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. And basically, they had a partnership with all of the local schools where they would take interns that were, you had to apply for the program, and your professors had to nominate you in order to be able to go there. So that was kind of, um, I think my professors just saw how much I loved testing hypotheses and science in general, and I think they, just kind of pushed me like, hey, you should apply for this. You should go do this. And that really was like the initial spark for me with my interest in research.
That's great. Um, and kind of another question related to that is I know that some students, depending on where they begin, feel like there could possibly be kind of a stigma around kind of their training pathway. And I'm curious, did you feel like that was a thing when you were applying, or did you feel like people like applauded you for kind of pursuing the pathway that you did?
Yeah, I think it's kind of been both. I think initially when I was applying, it felt more like a negative, like, um, as someone I've been on several admissions committees, MD, PhD, I can see like their side of things, which is like, you don't know the quality of a community college, especially one that's like a small local community college. So you don't know the quality of the education. You don't know if an A there is really outstanding or maybe it's just average. It's really hard to gauge that. And so I felt like that put me at a little bit of a disadvantage in some ways. But I can say since getting accepted to a program and being nearly finished with the program and now in the midst of residency application season, I think it's looked at as like an incredible positive. And, you know, people are just really impressed. I think I picked the hardest possible thing I could do, and I'm almost done with it. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and congratulations for making it this far in your journey.
Thank you.
Um, as kind of highlighted in our presentation, there are so many different routes to becoming a physician scientist, and that includes the medical portion of the training. We talked about how you could pursue just clinical training and then go on to do other research, or you can get these combined degrees. And starting with you, Arthi, I know that everyone on this panel here decided to pursue an MD, PhD. And how did you kind of rationalize that decision, and why did you ultimately decide to go the way that you did?
So, when I was looking at medical school, I knew that I was really interested in research after these public health experiences. I came into college with an interest in research. I, at the time, thought that research was bench science. So I thought, okay, I'll join this gene regulatory network lab, and it was a sea urchin model system group, and quickly realized that I liked research, but not that sort of research, and that I felt like the questions I was asking and what I wanted to think about were quite different. After some public health experiences, I was more interested in sort of who would have access to these medications, how can we improve financing, sustainability, how do we get people to uptake them, rather than the bench science questions. So that sort of sent me down the path of wanting to explore what that sort of research would look like. At the time, there were and there are still fewer programs that are MD PhDs that will accept more social science applicants, so fields like public health, anthropology, history, etc. But they're definitely out there. So when I was making that decision, I was thinking of sort of finding what programs would be a good fit for me, what faculty I want to work with, and then I ended up applying to both MD and MD PhD programs just to sort of cover my bases, as I wasn't sure if programs would have an interest in my line of work, since I was more so a global injury researcher person at the time. And so that's how I made that decision. Sorry, I was answering some chat questions, so I hope I answered your question, but if not, please.
No, thank you for the answer, Arthi. I'll also ask that question for you, Vijeeth. Did you always kind of know that you wanted to do the dual degree, or did you consider a single degree?
Yeah, no, I definitely did not always know that I wanted to do the dual degree. I think there were points like once I realized that I like both the idea of research and also being a doctor, that I was still thinking about how I want to apply and like if an MD PhD was necessarily right for me. And I think it was talking to other people who had like been in that position and made that decision, and just like learning more like you guys are doing right now about what this pathway entails, that helped me decide that MD PhD is the right decision for me. But like Arthi, I did also apply to both MD and MD PhD programs when I submitted my application, just to, like Arthi said, cover my bases a little bit. Because for me, I think I still saw the opportunity to do research later if I didn't get into an MD PhD, but did get into an MD. But it would be harder to kind of backtrack and do medical school later, in my opinion. So I think that was my reasoning. But my goal was to get into an MD PhD, and that was what I primarily applied to.
Great, thank you, Vijeeth. So one thing that kind of comes up a lot is the concept of gap years. It's starting to become kind of increasingly common to see students take a little bit of time after completing their undergraduate degree, most often to directly pursue medical school, or to pursue research, but often sometime or yeah, I'm word salad. Um, but often to do research. And so I wanted to ask some of our panelists about gap years. And first with you, Danielle, did you take any gap years?
Yeah, I absolutely did take gap years. And I think I was probably one of the few people that did more clinical experience because I had had so much research experience. So I actually wanted to make sure that I wanted to be in the clinic. And I don't recommend that. I think that, doing gap years in research is probably more valuable for MD, PhD programs. But while I did do 2 gap years, I will say I've met, different MD, PhD program directors, and a lot of them were asking, how do we get people to not take a gap year and to just feel like they're ready and that they can just apply? So I think that there is kind of a disconnect where a lot of programs wish that students didn't have to feel the need to take more gap years and do more research because the training program is so long already. But I think that's kind of the direction that we've been heading in, unfortunately. But I do think gap years are really valuable. So I would highly recommend them if you want some time to think about your life.
Yeah, and that's definitely a conversation that I've seen, and is kind of a conversation that's being held more broadly across program directors as well. Arthi, did you take any gap years?
Yes, I took one gap year, and it was mostly, like Danielle said, to figure out my life because I got to college with an interest in public health, right? But I had not really had much experience in it. And so it was some field work in India and some research that made me sort of fall down that path of what public health could look like. So in my undergrad, I did research on pediatric mental health in India through some of this global health work, but was trying to figure out, is my interest in mental health, is my interest in something else? Can I try and prepare myself to get more research skills before I figure out what I want to do long term? So at Duke, there was an opportunity to do an accelerated master's in global health for global health majors. So I applied at the end of my junior year to try and figure out what I wanted to do and get more kind of stronger research training. So I started that master's in my senior year, took some classes then, and then took one official gap year afterwards to do my master's thesis, my very remote field work, as this was during the COVID pandemic, and then finish up my classes. And I loved that gap year because I think without it, I wouldn't have figured out what I wanted to do long term, and that wouldn't have sort of jump started me into my PhD work. I joined a lab for my master's that was focused on global emergency medicine, which was quite a pivot from my work in mental health, but it was because the mentors are really good people and I knew people who worked for them and they were using methods in epidemiology and implementation science and geospatial mapping that I thought was really cool. So I figured, why not join this lab and just see what's out there? And so working with them and doing my master's work with them is what made me fall in love with injury epidemiology and want to continue that. And I really think I benefited a lot from the gap year because it solidified not only that I want a life that's focused around research, running my own lab, having my own students, sort of being independent in projects, but also gave me a lot of the skills to fine tune my PhD project and feel more prepared when I came to Northwestern to sort of figure out what do I want to do and where do I fall in the niche of what my PI is doing and sort of how can I extend that. So I really enjoyed it, and I feel like gap years give you some time to figure things out, but for me also it gave me a lot of maturity just to think more independently about research in a way that I feel like I didn't always get to as an undergrad when I was starting out. So I too would recommend them if you feel like it's a good fit for you and don't feel like a gap year has to be like a research position. It can also be a master's or additional training or clinical work, like Danielle said. It's sort of whatever you feel like you need at the time. There's no one way to do it.
Thanks, Arthi. So I think it wouldn't be a day in the life of a physician scientist, I guess trainee for this portion of the panel, if we didn't learn a little bit more about kind of what the day in your a day in your lives looks like. And I know we have both Arthi and Vijeeth, you are both in the graduate portion of training. Danielle, you're in the late medical school portion. But Arthi, you are the closest of us, or of the panelists rather, to kind of the early medical portion of the curriculum. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what kind of the days looked like for that part of school?
Sure. So, Daniel, as you mentioned in your slides, there are a couple of different sort of ways to go about an MD PhD program in terms of 242 or what have you. So Northwestern is a 242 in that it's 2 years of preclinical and then PhD and so on. So those two preclinical years are very lecture based. I think at the majority of med schools, they're split up into modules. So at Northwestern, we started out with some review modules in biochemistry, genetics, and then moved to infectious disease and then organ system by organ system, which were around a month each. And each of these modules had lectures. And so we spent our days usually either going to lectures in person or watching recordings or watching them synchronously. And there would be an exam at the end of each module and throughout some quizzes or activities to help figure out if we're up to speed or where we might need more help or things to review. And then some modules have anatomy lab. So things like musculoskeletal module, the neuro module have anatomy lab sprinkled throughout where you get to go to the lab and see the anatomy in person, which was cool. And then most med schools as well have a student clinic. So at Northwestern in preclinical phase, we went every other week to our student clinic and sort of saw patients a little bit more independently and then practice those skills that we saw in the classroom with real patients, which was really cool to be able to do. So that's sort of how life looked first 2 years or so.
How about you, Vijeeth? Now that you are kind of well into grad school, what has life in grad school looked like?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say day-to-day life in grad school can be pretty variable. It can really depend on like what is kind of next on my radar. There's a lot of there's not as much structure in grad school as in med school, like Arthi described, where it's kind of like you have these sets of classes and tests and things that it's all very regimented and you kind of just know where to go. In grad school, it's more about setting your own deadlines and then figuring out what your priorities are for the given week. For example, for me, a typical day can look like like I said, I do a lot of computational research, so it might be a mix of coding for a few hours, going to meetings, either with my PI to discuss like research results or journal clubs where we discuss some papers in the field, or meetings with collaborators I have pretty often where other people also share their results and the experiments that they've been working on, so we can all kind of learn from each other. So it's a mix of doing things like that, doing like actual research work, which is for me like coding, and then also a lot of writing. Grad school involves a lot of writing for various different things. For example, this week I've been working on like a grant resubmission, so I've been doing a lot of writing. So my day in the life this week hasn't been super interesting. It's just been sitting at my computer typing for 8 hours, but it really depends week by week. And I think it's like it gives you a lot of flexibility, which is good in some ways because you can structure your days as you wish, but you also have to kind of keep your own pace to make sure that you're on track. And of course, your advisor will help you with things like that, but slightly different from med school in that regard.
Definitely. I can definitely relate to the early grad school days of showing up and being like, what do I do with my life? But then you figure it all out. Danielle, now that you are in the clinical phase, could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the clinical phase, MS34 is like the absolute best. It's so hard and you have like no freedom of time. So that goes away like so quickly where you're just like, oh, I can show up at 10 today or 11, like no big deal. On the clinic, it's like whatever the schedule is, that's what your schedule is, and it's pretty time intensive. But at the same time, it's like you are learning so much so quickly because you're learning from your patients and you're actually contributing to patient care. You might get to assist with procedures like intubation or, putting IVs in or, whatnot. So it's really like really high intensity, a lot of time, but you're learning so much and it's the coolest thing ever. So I really love that. but my schedule overall right now in fourth year is starting to become more about residency interviews. So it's kind of that season for me. I'm also finishing up a few rotations on emergency medicine and critical care, which is really fun. And then still outside of that, trying to wrap up some research projects and also do some fun extracurricular things during that time too, which is really rewarding.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing kind of a little bit about each of the different phases. So like we mentioned, these are really long programs and you spend a lot of time at school or at work. And one of the really common questions that we've seen in the chat is people have asked, do you feel like you've had to put your life on hold as you're kind of on this training program? And I'll kick it to you, Vijeeth. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's always important to consider like work-life balance when you're thinking about such a long program, and so I can definitely talk about that. I would say it actually surprisingly felt like once I was out of college and then in this program is when I stopped putting my life on hold, if that makes sense at all. Because I think now that like I'm here in this 8-year program, it's kind of the long pathway is a reminder that you can't just like keep waiting for the next thing to stop putting your life on hold. So in terms of like just trying to structure my day to day and not burn out, I think I've done a lot better job of that ever since college and being here than I did back then. And I mean, I don't have like I can't give like family planning advice and whatnot because I'm not at that stage of my life yet. But just in terms of like being able to like in medical school, I thought it was super busy, but it honestly I had more time than I did in undergrad a lot of the days, and it was nice to finally have a little control over what my day-to-day looked like. And in grad school, like I said, it's been a lot of structuring my weeks on my own terms. And sometimes that is harder when things go unexpectedly and like there's deadlines coming up and whatnot. But I think I've also managed to strike a good balance between being able to like do things like this, for example, or hang out with my friends on the weekends. I try rarely to work on weekends, which in college I was always working on weekends. And that's like very nice to now have this clear separation between when I'm in lab and doing work and then when I come home and I can just be a person and do whatever else I want to do. So I hope that answers the question a little bit, but I can pass it on to the others.
Yeah, certainly. And I also wanted to ask this question to you, Danielle. Since you are nearing the end of this long journey, do you feel like it's taken away from your ability to do life?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I actually met with one of the research residency program directors, and we were kind of talking about this, and he gave me some really good advice that I've been kind of reflecting on. But really, this is all about the journey and not the destination. I really feel that way. If you're really going to truly become a physician scientist, like it's never really going to end, and you have to really enjoy what you're doing and find meaning and purpose in what you're doing. And I think, when I initially started medical school, I was overwhelmed and I absolutely like put everything, on the back burner and I was very burnt out. And then I think partway through MS1 2, I started joining like the free clinic and actually like seeing patients and like doing all of these fun extracurricular activities. And I think it really boosted my morale and kind of made me feel like, hey, I can do all these things while I'm doing this hard thing of medical school, and I can still go spend time with friends and do these things. At the same time, it's like you're not going to be in the same position as a lot of your friends. A lot of my friends have like 9 to 5 jobs Monday through Friday, and they don't have to work on weekends. And most of the time I'm trying to catch up on weekends, and it's a really big time commitment, and you really have to find purpose and meaning in it for it to feel like like you could do this for the rest of your life. I feel that way, but not everyone does.
Yeah, and it's definitely a balance and how you want to choose to kind of spend your time. and for students to know that, this is a significant time investment. So if you're going into it, hopefully it's something that you are passionate about and enjoy. I know that in both kind of your answers, Danielle and Vijeeth, you both kind of mentioned this concept a little bit of burnout. And Danielle, you talked about how you kind of overcame it through some of those experiences. And Vijeeth, you're just a happy camper and love it, what you're doing. But how about you, Arthi? Have you experienced kind of burnout in your training thus far? And if so, how have you kind of gone about managing that?
That's a good question. I definitely did. And if I could do it differently, I think I would have tried to make college a little bit easier for myself. I got through college feeling like, oh, I have to do all these things to get into med school. There's this and this and this and this. I never really gave myself a break. And then when I did my master's program, it was all very fast and condensed into a year. And then there was a global pandemic that threw my research in a twist. And so when I got to med school, I already felt pretty burnt out as I didn't really feel like I'd ever taken that much of a break. But I think for me, prioritizing the things that I know will make me well has been important. So, for example, it's difficult for me to say, oh, I'll take a break for this number of hours on a weekend because I'll always fill that time with something else, or I'll feel like I need to do this or do that other thing. But for me, it's been playing in our medical orchestra. I've been playing percussion for nearly 15 years now, and that's always like a 2 hour rehearsal every Tuesday. I have to be there, I have to show up for my section. And so that's been a nice break to not only feel like, okay, I have to be there, I've scheduled it, I can't say, no, I'm going to fill it with something else, but also just to be able to play music with other musicians and a lot of people in the medical field and feel like we're just doing something fun together. So that's been something I've prioritized. And even though sometimes I'm like, oh, I have to go to rehearsal, like I always leave it feeling much more energized, right? And I feel like if it's the gym or music or art or what have you, just scheduling those hobbies is really important and making like building that time in just as you build in your research time and other activities you have to do. Similarly, I really try and build in time to call my parents who are in Texas and visit them when I can, and that's been really important to me just to check in with them and feel like I get time to actually really connect with them and talk to them. So I think for me, those have been really important, but I think it took me a while to realize that yes, I deserve to take breaks. Like we are not machines, right? And this is a long training program. So figuring out what makes you sane and making sure that you build that in, I think is super important.
Awesome. Thanks, Arthi. So I know that kind of at the beginning, you each mentioned a little bit about your research interests. And it wouldn't be a physician scientist event if we didn't talk a little bit about that. But I know that you guys all are doing very different things. And just very briefly, without getting too into the weeds, can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what are you excited about with your research, and what kind of gets you going about it? And I'll start with you, Danielle.
Yeah, so I'm not going to bore you guys with the details, but basically I studied a genetic mutation in a protein called DNA polymerase beta. That has basically, through my research, showed that this has the propensity to drive cancer formation. So potentially in the future could be used as a way to screen patients for those that might be at higher risk of cancer formation. And I think what really excites me about research, obviously, like that project's kind of finished, and I'm moving on to like looking at future projects and kind of what I want my research career to be super focused on. But I think, I get excited about when I can see the direct connection and the direct impact of what I'm doing with the actual patient. So I think it's always really difficult for me when I can't see the connection. I'm like, but wait, there's this thing, and it's probably not going to make sense in a human population, and it just isn't going to be valuable. Then it's like I forget it. I like lose all interest. I'm just like, I don't want to do this. Like, get me out of here. Someone send help. So I think I really I want to be in that translational space for research, and I'm also really interested in clinical trials. So I'm kind of on the fence actually, career-wise. I'm thinking I could run a research lab that does translational research directly, or I could run the clinical trials and partner with a PhD who runs a lab and does, basic science research and kind of help them bridge from basic science to translational, and still be a part of the day-to-day activities without, being the sole one responsible for getting paychecks to everyone. So.
Great, thank you. How about you, Vijeeth? Kind of what gets you excited and what is your current concept of where that's going to go?
Yeah, so my research is in pneumonia, broadly speaking. So in my lab, we use like a combination of clinical data from the electronic health record and also patient samples from the lungs to study pneumonia outcomes, basically, to keep it broad. But what gets me really excited about that is uh, the fact that, first of all, we're working with like direct patient data. Like it's from the electronic health record. It's really as like direct to the patient that as you can get, which as a physician scientist especially is really cool because you also like have been on the other side where you're the physician entering stuff into the electronic health record. So seeing that complete loop is really cool. And I think in terms of the group that I'm in, I get really excited because there's always, I think like Danielle was saying, there's this huge emphasis on the clinical connection of what we're doing and not just doing research for the sake of doing research. In every meeting that I'm in, it's like it'll always come back to, well, like why does this matter? Why does this matter to the patient? And that is easy because there's a lot of physician scientists in the room with us, and it's like cool to see how they are pushing for that kind of thinking, and it really also gives me inspiration to become like that type of person in the future, and shows me like the type of scientist I can be that brings clinical insights to the lab. And in terms of like future career, I'm still not sure yet. Like I said, there are all these role models now that I have been introduced to through my research and the groups that I'm integrated with, where I see like doctors in pulmonary critical care, especially because I work with pneumonia, who are like directly seeing patients and then asking these questions and then using clinical data and biological data to answer those questions. And I don't know if that means I want to have my own like full lab and be a PI in the future or participate in collaborations with other PIs or maybe just be involved in more clinical facing research like clinical trials. But I think I am very confident that I want research to be part of my career in some shape or form. And I'm just not sure how I want to balance things yet.
And how about you, Arthi?
Similar to Danielle and Vijeeth and getting excited about what we see in the clinic and from patients, I'm really excited about seeing challenges and perspectives from the community and being able to try and target those with research through public health methods. So broadly, what I do now is in injury prevention, like I mentioned, but particularly with car seat safety. So a challenge that we saw in the emergency department, Lurie Children's, is that kids either didn't have a car seat or couldn't use it properly. Car seats can be pretty difficult to install and to use, especially for first-time parents. And so my PI had been collecting data to try and figure out sort of which neighborhoods do we need more resources in, who needs more education, sort of what can we do. And so I've been really interested in working with families and learning from them what are those challenges, what needs do they have, and how can we address them. So that got me really interested in using national crash data, car seat check data to basically use large data sets and map out where do we need resources and where do we need different types of resources for different types of problems. So really excited to both learn from the community and also be able to hopefully bring those insights back in the next couple of years and share with community partners from medical professionals to policymakers to automotive engineers about the challenges that we're seeing and being able to hopefully target them together. So that's what I'm really passionate about is just working with these different kinds of key personnel on these similar challenges and being able to really understand what the community needs and try and address that with mapping methods. I feel like maps are really digestible and everyone can see a map and understand what it means. And so it's been really cool to be able to share those with others.
Yeah, and so for all of the students kind of on our call, you can see that really one of the anchoring things that kind of it was brought up by everyone is really that the patients are kind of at the heart of everything, right? You can see that everyone's really passionate about the research, but bringing it back and working with the patient data, working with real patients and seeing them is really an important driver for physician scientists. So as we get to kind of the last 5 minutes of our panel, I just want to wrap up with a couple questions for you guys. And the first one is really what has been your favorite part of your training so far, if you look back in kind of a 1 minute, do you have a particular highlight or anecdote that you would want to share with us? And Arthi, I'll start with you.
A big question for 1 minute. Something that comes to mind is something pretty recently. So, as Daniel knows, because he's in my cohort, I became really interested in car seats. Never knew much about car seats before coming to Northwestern, but my PI has been doing work in this, and so one of my favorite moments has been training to be a car seat technician. I didn't want to just crunch numbers behind the scenes and look at data sets. I wanted to actually work with families directly and figure out what those challenges were. So I trained and now I work at Lurie clinics and hand out resources and teach people how to use car seats. So that's been, I think, one of my all-time favorite moments. And it's made me really see the connection between what the challenges are and what we can actually do and feel a little bit closer to both the problem and the solution, if that makes sense, than just working behind the scenes on the data and really being able to share resources to people that need them. I've really enjoyed that.
And how about you, Danielle, as you kind of reflect on kind of the long journey, is there one particular highlight that you have?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Um, I think I would say my favorite highlight so far, and I've loved every component of the training. But I'd say it's been just the experience of having a cohort of 5 students. We all started together. We are so tight. Actually, two of my cohort members got married. So we're so close. And seeing, I graduated a year early, but I got to see all of them achieve, receive their PhD, defend their thesis. I got to call them doctor for the first time. I still do that from time to time in very unserious situations, and I love to, tease them about it. But I think that has been one of my favorite experiences, is just watching like the people that I love, that I'm, so close with, in this journey, achieve their goals.
Oh, I was talking to the muted microphone. Very cute about your cohort members, and that's really great to hear. And the very last question, and I'll take it to you, Vijeeth, is for like speaking to all of our undergraduates on the call and really speaking to kind of your undergraduate self. Do you have any particular advice that you would give now that you are where you are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would say the biggest thing is like don't be intimidated by this pathway. I know it seems like something that's so foreign right now and seems like it is a difficult commitment, but if it's something that you genuinely think that you're interested in, I would just keep exploring doing things like this and learning more because it is really great. Like I think all the panelists have said, we've really enjoyed our time in this program so far. And I think that for me at least, I know that at the end of this is a fulfilling career where I get to do the things that I want to do. And yeah, I think like looking back to my undergrad self, I was very unsure and intimidated because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. Like I knew I liked these things, but I still didn't have a good idea of exactly how that would turn out. But I don't think that should stop you from just continuing to explore different opportunities and find the path that's right for you.
Great advice. Thank you, Vijeeth. And we're right on time at 8 o'clock to wrap up our student panel. But with that, I just want to really thank you guys, Arthi, Vijeeth, and Danielle, for spending the past hour with us and really talking and reflecting on your experiences. It's really much appreciated. And I'm sure that all of the students learned a lot, and I learned a lot just from your answers as well. So with that, we're going to go into a short 5-minute break. And after the break, we'll be back with the new moderator who will take over for me, Nicholas Zakarowski, and Dr. Ginny Baumgardner. So stay tuned for that. Thanks.